There is a certain kind of power that does not announce itself. It does not walk in with sirens or sharp suits. It does not arrive with guns at its hip or guards at its shoulder. It enters quietly, wrapped in something ordinary, something forgettable, something that the eyes of dangerous men slide right over without stopping. That is the most dangerous kind of power in the world, and Clara Bennett had learned to wear it like a second skin. The Kwan estate sat behind iron gates in the private hills of Songbuk-dong, Seoul. The kind of neighborhood where the walls between properties were so high you could forget that other human beings existed. The gardens were manicured to an impossible perfection. The driveway alone was longer than some city blocks. And the house, calling it a house, was the kind of understatement that would have made the architect weep. It was a fortress dressed as a home, beautiful on every surface, cold in every corner. 22 staff members lived and worked within those gates. Groundskeepers, chefs, security personnel, a private physician who came 3 times a week and never made eye contact with anyone, a housekeeper who had been with the family for 11 years and knew how to become invisible when the air in a room changed, and one maid, Clara Bennett, 24 years old, Nigerian-British by birth, compact in frame but precise in every movement, the kind of person who positioned things half a centimeter to the left and then stepped back to decide if that was correct. She had warm brown eyes that absorbed everything without reacting to any of it, a mouth that stayed composed even when her mind was running at full speed, and hands that were always busy with something. She had been hired 8 months ago through a premium domestic placement agency in Itaewon. Her Korean was flawless, better than some of the Korean staff, truthfully, which had caused its own quiet tension in the beginning. Her references were immaculate. Her work ethic was the kind that made supervisors stop finding things to correct. She cleaned. She organized. She served meals in silence. She changed linens with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it since childhood. She never spoke unless spoken to, never lingered near conversations that were not meant for her, never asked about the paintings on the walls or the photographs that had been turned face down on the mantelpiece in the main study. She was invisible. That was the plan. She had made it the plan before she ever walked through those gates. But there was one thing she did, one small, quiet thing, that she could not make herself stop doing no matter how carefully she tried. Every morning at exactly 6:47, when she pushed her cleaning cart down the East Wing corridor, she would stop outside the 3rd door on the left. She would stand there for no more than 3 seconds. She would press her palm flat against the door, so lightly that not even the wood could feel it, and she would close her eyes. Then she would continue. No one had noticed yet, or so she believed. Kwon Tae-jin was not the kind of man people believed things about. He was 43 years old, built like a man who had spent decades being unmoved by things that would break ordinary people, and he carried a silence around him that was not peaceful. It was the silence of a room where something had just happened that no one wanted to speak about. His face was the kind that had been handsome once and still was, but in the way that carved stone is handsome, impressive, cold, and entirely indifferent to whether you found it beautiful. He ran the Kwan Group, officially a holding company, with investments in the pharmaceuticals, private logistics, commercial real estate, and security consulting. Publicly listed. board of directors, annual charity gala with photographs in the business press. Unofficially, in the language that moved through the underground networks of Seoul's criminal world in careful whispers, Kwon Tae-jin was the man whose name you did not say out loud without looking over your shoulder first. He had rebuilt his father's organization from the splintered, bloody mess it had become after the old man's death, and turned it into something that looked, from every public angle, completely legal. That was the masterwork, not the power, not the money, the cleanliness, the impeccable, suffocating cleanliness of it all. The Korean National Intelligence Service had 3 active files on him. None of them had produced a single prosecutable result in 6 years. Because Kwon Tae-jin was not a man who made visible mistakes. He was controlled in the way that surgical instruments are controlled. Precise, purposeful, never an unnecessary movement. His staff operated under a code of conduct that was so strict it felt less like employment and more like enrollment in a military order. No personal conversations within earshot of guests. No mobile devices in private wings. No questions about family matters. No contact with external press. And absolutely, under no circumstance, no interaction with his son beyond what was medically or domestically necessary. His son, Kwon Ji-woo, 8 years old, the boy in room 7. Nobody spoke about Ji-woo openly, not because they did not care. Some of them did, quietly, privately, in the way that people who are paid to be professional still sometimes feel human things they were not hired to feel. But because Kwon Tae-jin had made it quietly, firmly, unmistakably clear that his son was not a subject, not a conversation, not a door that anyone on his staff was entitled to open. What they knew, what they had gathered in the careful, wordless way that people who work in the silent houses gather information, was this. Ji-woo was ill. They had been ill for 2 years. The private physician, Dr. Kim Hyun-jae, came 3 times a week and stayed for 2 hours each visit. Medical equipment had been installed in room 7, equipment that required its own technician to service once a month. The boy did not go to school. He did not play in the gardens. Occasionally, on good days, he could be heard through the walls, not crying, not in pain, but singing softly to himself, small wordless melodies that floated into the corridor and then disappeared. On bad days, the corridor was silent, and Kwon Tae-jin would sit outside room 7 in a chair that had no business being in a hallway, a large expensive chair that someone had quietly moved there months ago and that no one had dared move back. And he would sit until morning came. The most powerful man in Seoul's criminal underworld, sitting alone in a corridor, listening to his son breathe. It was on one of those nights that Clara Bennett made her first mistake. She had not been scheduled for the East Wing after 10 p.m. Her duties ended at 9:30. She should have been in the staff quarters. She should have been asleep, or at least pretending to be, but she had come back. She had come back because she heard the singing stop. She pushed the cart quietly, so quietly that the wheels barely whispered against the marble floor, and she turned the corner of the East Wing at 11:17 p.m., and she stopped. Because he was there, Kwon Tae-jin, sitting in that chair, jacket removed, collar open, elbows on his knees, and his face in his hands. And he was not moving. He was not doing anything. He was simply sitting there the way a man sits when he has forgotten how to be anything other than exhausted. Clara did not move. She stood at the end of the corridor, 15 meters away, and she looked at him. And something happened in her expression that no one who worked at the Quan estate had ever seen happen on Clara Bennett's face. Something broke open. Just for a moment, just a flicker, a softening around the eyes, a slight trembling at the corner of her mouth. Something that looked dangerously, unmistakably like grief. Then he looked up, and she was already composed again. They stared at each other across the length of the corridor. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low. Not angry. Not yet. But calibrated. The way a blade is calibrated before it is used. "I apologize, sir," Clara said. "I thought I heard something." "You thought?" "Yes." His eyes held hers for 4 seconds longer than comfort allowed. "Go back to your quarters," he said. She nodded. She turned the cart. She walked back the way she came. And she did not allow herself to look back at him. But she counted his footsteps when he finally rose from the chair and went back inside his son's room. She counted them. She had been counting them for 8 months. The next morning, Clara was summoned, not to the main office, not to Mrs. O's management station, where the domestic staff received their schedules and corrections. She was summoned to the private study on the 2nd floor, a room that smelled of cedar and old paper and something metallic underneath it all that she could never quite name. Park Sung-ho was waiting for her at the door. He was Kwon Tae-jin's head of personal security and the man that the rest of the staff communicated with when they needed to communicate upward. 40-something. Former military, by the way. He stood, a face like a wall, not unfriendly, exactly, but offering nothing. "The director wants to speak with you," Park Sung-ho said, using the title the staff were required to use. "I understand," Clara said. She followed him in. Kwon Tae-jin was standing at the window with his back to her, looking out at the gardens below. He was in a full suit again. The exhausted man from the corridor had been packed away somewhere invisible, and in his place was the version of him that the world was allowed to see. "Close the door," he said, without turning. Park Sung-ho closed it from the outside. They were alone. "You have been with this household for 8 months," Kwon Tae-jin said, still at the window. "In that time, you have received no corrections from the household management. Your duties have been performed to standard. You have caused no problems." "Thank you, sir." That was not a compliment. He turned then, and his eyes found her immediately, with the efficiency of a man who always knows exactly where in a room the thing he is looking for is located. It was an observation. "I observe things carefully, Miss Bennett. I have observed you carefully." Something in Clara's stomach moved, but her face showed nothing. "Last night," he continued, "you were in the East Wing after hours. You told me you heard something." "Yes, sir." "What did you hear?" The pause was brief, barely noticeable. "The singing stopped, sir. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Kwon Tae-jin was quiet for a moment. "The singing," he repeated, slowly, as though tasting the word. "Yes. You know whose room that is." "I know it is a private wing, sir. I did not attempt to enter." Another silence, longer this time. He moved from the window and sat at his desk, not in the way of a man settling in, but in the way of a man who positions himself strategically in a room. "My son's condition," he said, "is not a subject of discussion among the staff. I am aware. And yet you were outside his room at 11 p.m. because the singing stopped." He tilted his head slightly. "That is either very dedicated professionalism, Miss Bennett, or it is something else entirely." Clara met his gaze. It was professionalism, sir. He studied her for a long moment. Then, Doctor, Kim has recommended that Ji-woo benefit from more consistent human presence during his rest hours. His nurse resigned 2 weeks ago. The agency has not yet sent a suitable replacement. He paused. I am temporarily reassigning you. Clara's composure fractured, just barely, just at the edges. Sir, you will attend to Ji-woo's room during the morning and evening hours. Cleaning, meal delivery, light assistance as Dr. Kim directs. You will not engage him in extended conversation about matters outside his immediate comfort. You will not discuss his condition with other staff. You will not, sir. Clara's voice was quiet, but it cut through his words like something with an edge. I would prefer to remain in my current duties. The room went very still. Kwon Tae-jin's expression did not change. But something behind his eyes shifted, a slight tightening, the way the surface of water tightens before something beneath it moves. I beg your pardon, he said softly. I appreciate the confidence, sir, but I am a household maid, not a caretaker. I am not qualified. I did not ask you if you were qualified. His voice was still calm. That was the frightening part, how calm it stayed. I told you what your new assignment is. Clara was silent. Unless, he added, you would prefer to be relieved of your position entirely. She looked at him. He looked at her. No, sir, she said quietly. I will take the assignment. Good. He returned his attention to the documents on his desk, a dismissal so clean it barely needed to be performed. Park will brief you on Ji-woo's schedule. You start this afternoon. She turned to leave. Miss Bennett, she stopped. If you hear the singing stop again, he said, without looking up, you come to me first, not the East Wing. You understand? Clara's hand rested on the door frame for one breath. Yes, sir, she said. I understand. And she walked out. Ji-woo was smaller than she expected. That was the first thing she thought when Park Sung-ho opened the door to room 7 and stepped aside, and she walked in carrying a breakfast tray at 2 p.m. Adjusted hours, Dr. Kim's schedule, and found the boy sitting up in his bed with a book open across his lap. He was small, not in the fragile, frightening way of children who have been through serious illness for a long time. Or not only that, but in the way of a child who had always been built slightly fine-boned, slightly quiet, as if the world was a little louder than he had been designed for. He had his father's eyes. That same deep stillness. That same quality of absorbing everything without offering the interior back. He looked up when she entered, and he did not look afraid. He looked curious, which told Clara right away that he was a child who had learned to treat every new person as a potential source of something interesting, because interesting things did not come to him often. Hello, he said, in Korean first, and then watching her face. Hello again, in careful, slightly accented English. Clara set the tray down on the bedside table with precise care. Hello, Ji-woo, he blinked. You said my name right. Is that unusual? The last nurse said it wrong for 3 months. He considered her. What's your name? Clara. Clara. He tried it, nodded, satisfied. Where are you from, Clara? Nigeria, originally, but I grew up mostly in London. London, he repeated. Then, with the sudden disconcerting focus of a very intelligent 8-year-old, do you know what's wrong with me? Clara paused in the act of adjusting his water glass. I know you have been unwell, she said carefully. My heart, he said simply, not with drama. with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who has been living inside this information for so long, it has lost its ability to frighten him in the moment-to-moment way. It doesn't work properly. Papa says it's being fixed. He looked out the window. Papa says a lot of things that aren't exactly true, but he says them in the kind voice. So I don't tell him I know. Clara was very still. She looked at this boy. This small, still, impossibly perceptive boy, and something moved through her chest like a current. "You are very wise," she said quietly. "I read a lot," he replied, gesturing at the book. "There's not much else to do." He glanced at her sideways. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Yes." "Promise?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I promise." She kept that promise for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, several things happened. Some visible, some invisible. The visible things. Ji-woo began eating more. He began sleeping better, according to Dr. Kim's notes, which he shared with Kwon Tae-jin in their weekly briefings. He started talking more, not just to Clara, but through the intercom system he used to communicate with his father, initiating conversations rather than just responding. He asked for new books, and Clara brought them. He started the small wordless melodies again, more frequently. The invisible things were different. The invisible things were the conversations that happened in room 7 between 6:40 and 8 a.m., when the house was still waking, and it was just Clara and Ji-woo and the early light that came through the eastern windows. Ji-woo asked her questions about London, about Nigeria. "Tell me about the colors," he said once, out of nowhere, and Clara spent 40 minutes describing the colors of a country she had not been to since she was 4 years old, with a precision that made her wonder when she had memorized them so completely. About music. He was obsessed with music. He could not attend concerts or performances, but he listened to everything. Korean ballads, West African highlife, British orchestral pieces, American jazz. And he had opinions about all of it that were startling in a child who had spent 2 years in a single room. He asked about her family, and here, for the first time, Clara's composure became something she had to work at. She told him what was safe to tell. Her mother, London, a small flat, the sound of rain on a window. She did not tell him the rest, not yet. But the invisible thing that mattered most was this. Every morning when she arrived in room 7, Ji-woo reached out and took her hand and held it briefly. Just for a moment, with the unself-conscious ease of a child who does not yet understand that holding someone's hand is supposed to mean something specific, and then let go and went back to his book. Clara always looked at the door after he did it, because outside the door, visible through the narrow window panel, she had noticed once, twice, 3 times the shadow of feet. Kwon Tae-jin standing in the corridor, watching. It was a Tuesday in November when everything shifted. Clara was crossing the main hall at 7 p.m. with a stack of folded linens when she overheard it. Not through carelessness, not through deliberate eavesdropping, but because the door to the private sitting room had been left 3 centimeters open, and sound travels differently in houses built with certain ceilings. 2 voices, Kwon Tae-jin and Dr. Kim Hyun-jae. She should have kept walking. Her feet stopped without asking her permission. "The donor list," Dr. Kim was saying, in the careful, technical voice of a man delivering news he has already delivered before, but not yet had absorbed. "We've been through every compatible register: South Korea, Japan, China, Germany, the United States. The genetic profile is too specific, Taejin. Without a closely matched donor, find one. Kwon Taejin's voice, flat, certain. The voice of a man who has never met a problem that sufficient force could not resolve. I have been finding them for 18 months. Dr. Kim paused. We are running out of time. Ji-woo's cardiac function has declined another 4% since September. By spring, he stopped. Say it. By spring, we are looking at either a transplant or find the donor. Taejin. Dr. Kim's voice was careful, patient, the voice of a man who cares. There is one possibility we have not fully explored. I ran the genetics again last week. There is a specific West African genetic marker in Ji-woo's profile that I cannot account for from your side or from Soo-yeon's family records. It is minor, but it could be the reason the matches keep failing. The registers we've been searching don't have adequate West African representation. If I could run a broader search through the African diaspora genetic medical networks, silence. A long silence. No, Kwon Taejin said. Taejin, I said no. The flatness in his voice this time was different. It was not the flat certainty of a powerful man dismissing a problem. It was the flat sound of a door slamming shut over something that had always been locked. Dr. Kim sighed quietly. All right, I'll look at the European registers again. Clara was standing motionless in the corridor, the linens in her arms. Say her heart, her own perfectly functioning, perfectly ordinary heart, was beating so hard she could feel it in her back teeth. She made herself walk, quietly, carefully, all the way to the linen storage room at the end of the west wing. She set the linens down on the shelf. She pressed her back against the wall. And she stood there in the dark, and she breathed and she thought about what she had been not thinking about for 8 months. She thought about her mother. Her mother, a Daisy Bennett, who had come to Korea 25 years ago on a scholarship to Yonsei University and met a man at a cultural exchange dinner and fallen in love with a speed that frightened her and thrilled her in equal measure, who had gone back to London 9 months later, alone and silent, who had raised Clara in a small flat in Peckham and never spoken the name of Clara's father. Not once, not ever. Who had pressed a photograph into Clara's hand the morning before she died, 3 years ago, lung cancer, quiet and terrible, and said only, "There is a child, Clara. There is a child who needs what only you can give, when you are ready, when it is safe." A photograph of a man named Kwon Taejin at a university dinner 25 years ago, young, unguarded, laughing at something outside the frame. Clara pressed her hands flat against the wall behind her. She thought about Ji-woo, about his eyes, which were her mother's eyes, which were Clara's eyes, about his hand reaching out every morning with the easy instinct of a child who does not yet have language for what he feels, but acts on it anyway. She thought about the West African genetic marker in his cardiac profile that Dr. Kim could not account for. Ji-woo is her half-brother. She had known it before she walked through the gates of this estate. She had come here knowing it. She had come here because a dying woman had asked her to, had pressed a photograph into her hands and said, "There is a child who needs what only you can give." And Clara had spent 2 years tracing, researching, being certain before she ever let herself believe it. She had come here to give him bone marrow, if she was a match. She did not yet know if she was a match, because she had not told anyone who she was, because she did not know what a man like Kwon Taejin would do when he found out. She had made her decision before she fell asleep that night. She would go to Dr. Kim. She would request the test. Then she would frame it as voluntary, as something she had read about, something she wanted to contribute. She did not need to tell him everything. Not yet. She just needed to know if she was a match. If she was, when she was, she would tell him everything. She would have to, but she would know the answer first. She would not walk into that storm without knowing if she was carrying the thing that could end it. She requested the appointment with Dr. Kim the following morning, through the official staff health channel. She told him she wanted to register voluntarily for the National Bone Marrow Donor Registry and asked if he could facilitate the blood draw given the difficulty of her getting to an external clinic during working hours. Dr. Kim looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he said yes. But the results came back in 11 days. Dr. Kim called her into his medical room on the 3rd floor, not a room most staff entered, and he set a folder on the table between them, and he opened it without speaking. He placed one page in front of her. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the compatibility markers. She looked at the name at the top of the comparison profile, Kwon Ji-woo, DOB. She looked up at Dr. Kim. His face was very careful. "Clara," he said, "how did you know?" "Is it a match?" she asked. "It is a remarkable match." He paused. "The kind of match that doesn't happen between strangers." Another pause, even more careful. "The kind of match that happens between siblings," Clara said quietly. The words sat between them in the room like something that had its own weight. Dr. Kim sat back slowly. "He doesn't know," he said. It was not a question. "No? Does anyone know?" "My mother knew." Clara's voice was steady. She had practiced this steadiness for 3 years. She died before she could do anything about it. I came here to do it for her. Dr. Kim was quiet for a long time. "This is going to be," he began. "I know what it's going to be," Clara said. "I need you to tell me. Can we help Ji-woo?" "If the procedure is successful, and with this match the probability is high, yes. Yes, we can." "Then that's all I need to know," Clara said. "The rest is just a conversation." Dr. Kim looked at her with something in his expression that she did not expect from a physician who served a man like Kwon Tae-jin. He looked at her with something that looked very much like awe. Dr. Kim told Kwon Tae-jin that evening. Clara was not in the room for that conversation. She learned what happened in it only later, piece by piece, from the silence that followed it, from the way Park Sung-ho came to the staff quarters at 9:30 p.m. and stood in the doorway of her room and said, in a voice that had lost its professional smoothness and become simply a man's voice, "He would like to see you." The study felt different at night. Or perhaps it was just that everything in the Kwon estate felt different when the performance of normalcy had been stripped away, and what was left was just the truth of what happened inside these walls. Kwon Tae-jin was standing. He had not sat down, Claire understood, because a man like him did not yet know how to receive this kind of news sitting down. He was at the far end of the room, near the cold fireplace, Maid with a glass of something amber-colored that he was holding but not drinking. He did not look at her when she entered. He looked at the fireplace. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. The silence was substantial, full of things that did not yet have a shape. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since before I arrived." He absorbed this. His jaw moved slightly. "You came here knowing." "Yes." "Knowing who Ji-woo was." "Yes." "And you said nothing." He turned then. In his eyes, those still, deep, unknowable eyes were not still. They were the most unstill she had ever seen them. There was something moving behind them that she could not name precisely, but recognized in the way you recognize something you have seen in a mirror. For 8 months, you were in this house. You were in his room every morning, and you said nothing. I needed to be certain I was a match before I said anything. Clara's voice was steady. I would not have come to you with a story and no solution. A story. He repeated the word quietly, as though it meant something different to him than she had meant it. He set the glass down on the mantelpiece with a precision that was the only betrayal of how much control he was working to maintain. Your mother. Adaze Bennett? He was very still. She didn't tell you, Clara said. Not an accusation, an observation. She left. His voice was controlled, stripped of everything except the bare fact of it. After the year ended, she said she was going home. She didn't tell me. He stopped. She didn't know, Clara said. Not until after. And by then, she had decided that... She had decided. She raised you. She raised me. Alone. Alone. Kwon Tae-jin turned back to the fireplace. His hand went to the mantelpiece and rested there, flat, pressing lightly into the marble. And Clara recognized the gesture because she had been doing it outside Ji-woo's door for 8 months. And now you want to... He stopped again, seemed to locate a different way through the sentence. Dr. Kim says the match is very high, Clara said. He said the probability of success is the best he's seen in Ji-woo's case. The room was so quiet, she could hear the garden beyond the windows. Why? Kwon Tae-jin said. He turned around and faced her, and for the first time in all the months she had been in this house, he looked at her with the guard completely down. Not calculating, not assessing, not the architecture of control. Just a man, just a father, just someone who was trying to understand something that was larger than the frameworks he used to understand things. Why would you... He stopped. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. What I may have... He looked away. What I should have known... I'm not doing it for you, Clara said gently. I want to be clear about that. He looked at her. I'm doing it for him, she said. He is my brother. Whatever else is complicated, whatever conversations you and I need to have, and we will need to have them, he is my brother, and he needs me. She paused. My mother spent 24 years not knowing how to reach him. She spent the last 3 months of her life trying to figure out how to give him what she could no longer give. She sent me instead. Clara's voice was very quiet now. I am not going to fail her. Kwon Tae-jin was looking at her with an expression that had no name in any professional language. He looked like a man who had spent a long time being impossible to break, and had just discovered, very quietly, that the wrong kind of gentleness was more powerful than anything he had ever thought to defend against. Clara, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She waited. I have not handled this... He stopped. Started again. Dr. Kim wants to begin the preliminary procedure preparation immediately. The process is... There are steps. Preparation, several days in hospital. He paused. Before any of that begins, he needs Ji-woo to be stable, emotionally stable, the stress of... He looked at the door as though he could see through the walls to the east wing. If Ji-woo learns what is happening, who you are, all at once, Dr. Kim is concerned about the cardiac stress of... I understand, Clara said. He has grown, Kwon Tae-jin paused carefully, attached to you in a way that he has not in a very long time. He looked at his hands briefly, the hands of a man who controlled more resources and more dangerous people than most governments, and who right now looked like he did not know what to do with himself. I have watched you with him every morning. He cleared his throat. I owe you an apology for not— You don't, Clara said. I do. She let that sit. I have a request, he said, and here something changed in his voice. Something that Clara had never heard in it before. Not in 8 months, not once, something that was not authority. Something that was not command. Something smaller and rawer than that. It is not an order. I want to be clear that it is not an order. You are not simply my staff. You never were, though I did not know it. He exhaled. I am asking you, as— He seemed to struggle with what the correct word was, and eventually abandoned the search for it. I am asking you. Clara waited. Just one night, Kwon Tae-jin said. His voice for the first time was not the voice of the Kwon group. It was the voice of a man who had been sitting outside a door in a hallway chair for 2 years. Just one more night, he said, before everything changes. Before Dr. Kim begins the process. Before Ji-woo has to face what is coming. He looked at her directly. I am asking you to stay tonight, in the house, in the East Wing, not as staff, just— He cleared his throat. He asked for you tonight, before Dr. Kim came. He asked Park Sung-ho where you were and whether you were coming in the morning. He doesn't know. He stopped. He just asked for you. Clara looked at the man who was her brother's father. The man who had not known. The man who was sitting in corridor chairs in the middle of the night and pressing his hand against closed doors because the alternative was accepting that love could not fix everything, and he was not yet ready to accept that. She looked at him, and she did not feel what she had expected to feel when she imagined this moment. She had imagined anger. She had imagined distance. She had imagined the cold satisfaction of justice. Instead, she felt something much more complicated. She felt the same thing Ji-woo felt, she realized. Myra. When he reached out and took her hand in the morning. Recognition. I was going to stay anyway, she said quietly. I promised him I would be there in the morning. Kwon Tae-jin looked at her. Something in his face moved in a way that she suspected it had not moved in a very long time. Thank you, he said, and it came out rough at the edges, like a word he was not accustomed to meaning quite this much. Clara nodded once. Good night, sir. Tae-jin, he said. She paused. Call me Tae-jin, he said. Please. She looked at him for a moment. Good night, Tae-jin, she said. And she walked out of the study, down the corridor, and into the East Wing. She paused outside Ji-woo's door. She pressed her hand flat against it, not quietly this time, maybe not invisibly, and she stood there in the full light of the corridor with her palm against the wood. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Kwon Tae-jin stood at the end of the corridor. He did not come closer. He did not speak. He simply stood there, the most powerful man in Seoul's criminal world. And he watched her hand against his son's door. And he was quiet in a way that was not cold at all. It was the quietest she had ever seen him. Clara lowered her hand. She went inside. Ji-woo was awake when she entered. He always was lately. He had started waking earlier, a fact Dr. Kim noted as a positive indicator, the body moving toward activity rather than retreating from it. He looked up from his book. "You came," he said. "I promised," Clara said. She set the breakfast tray down. She adjusted the window to let the morning light in at the angle he preferred. He had told her 3 weeks ago, with the specificity of a child who has had a long time to develop opinions about small things. Not the full window, just the left curtain, just enough so the light comes from the side, not directly. She pulled the chair up beside his bed the way she always did. He reached out and took her hand, held it for a moment, let go, went back to his book. Clara sat beside him in the morning light, and she looked at him, at the shape of his face, at the way he held a book, at the small concentrated furrow he got between his brows when he encountered a word he was going to pretend he already knew before eventually asking her about it. And she thought about her mother. About a woman who had carried a secret for 24 years, not out of cruelty, but out of a kind of terrified love that had calcified into silence before she could find the way out of it. About all the mornings that could have been. Then she thought about all the mornings that were going to be. Dr. Kim had said the probability was high. High was not certain. Nothing in medicine was certain, and she understood that, and she held it. But high was something. High was a morning light through a window, left curtain only, coming from the side, not directly. High was a boy with his mother's eyes reaching for a hand he recognized before his mind had caught up with the recognition. High was enough. In the corridor outside, Kwon Tae-jin stood in his chair. Not sleeping, not working, just sitting, by listening to the soft sound of a language lesson drifting through the door. Jiwoo had decided, apparently sometime in the last 5 minutes, that Clara was going to teach him 3 words in Igbo before breakfast, and was negotiating this with the cheerful stubbornness of a child who has identified a favorable negotiating position and intends to use it. Kwon Tae-jin sat in his chair in the corridor, and for the first time in a very long time, the sound coming from room 7 was not silence. It was laughter, small, bright, his son's. He leaned his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes. He breathed. The procedure took 6 weeks to prepare and 4 hours to perform. Jiwoo was told, carefully and in stages, who Clara was, not all at once, not in a single conversation. It was Dr. and Kim who suggested the approach, and Clara who executed it over the course of 10 mornings in the left curtain light, in pieces small enough that an 8-year-old heart could hold each one before the next arrived. The day he understood what sister meant in relation to Clara, and not just in relation to a word in a book, he did not say anything for a very long time. Then he said, "So you knew who I was when you came?" "Yes." "And you came anyway?" "Yes." He thought about this. "Did you know you liked me?" he asked. "Before you met me?" Clara looked at him. "No," she said. "I didn't know that yet." "When did you know?" She thought about it. About the first morning. About the way he had said, "You said my name right," with the quiet, matter-of-fact relief of a child who had given up expecting it. "About 30 seconds in," she said, and Jiwoo nodded slowly with the gravity of a small person confirming a significant finding. "That's how it was for me, too," he said. He reached out and took her hand. This time, he did not let go. The procedure was successful. Not immediately. There were 6 difficult weeks of monitoring, 2 setbacks, one night in October when Dr. Kim's expression in the corridor told Kwon Tae-jin everything he was afraid to hear, and Tae-jin sat in the chair outside, room 7, until 4 in the morning, and Clara sat on the other side of the door on the floor with her back against it, until the numbers stabilized. But by December, Ji-woo's cardiac function had improved by 11%. By February, he was in the garden for the first time in 2 years. He walked to the end of the path by himself, turned around, looked back at the two people standing on the steps watching him. His father and Clara, not quite side by side, not quite at a distance, and he raised both arms above his head like a small triumphant flag. Kwon Tae-jin had 3 conversations with Clara over those months that mattered in ways that the hundreds of other conversations did not. The first was an apology, a real one, not the controlled, precise language of a man managing a situation, but the halting, unpolished speech of someone who had spent 43 years being very good at not needing to apologize for things that actually required it, and was discovering that this particular skill had left him badly equipped for this particular moment. He apologized for not knowing about her mother, for not knowing about her, for not— "Stop," Clara said gently. He stopped. "You can't apologize for what you didn't know," she said. "You can only be accountable for what you do now." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do now?" he asked. It was the most open question she had ever heard him ask. She thought about it carefully. "Be honest with Ji-woo," she said, "about everything, when he's old enough, about your life, about what this family is." She paused. "He already knows more than you think he does. He just loves you too much to make you feel it." Tae-jin absorbed this. "And you?" he said. "What do you want for yourself?" "I want to know my brother," Clara said. "That's why I came. That's still why I'm here." He nodded slowly. "And I want—" She paused. "I want to know what my mother saw in you 25 years ago, when you were just a boy at a university dinner." She looked at him. "I want to understand that. Someday." He looked back at her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, very quietly, in a voice she had never heard him use, which was the voice of the young man who had once laughed at something outside the frame of a photograph at a Yonsei University cultural exchange dinner in a way that made a brilliant, careful, love-frightened woman fall before she had a chance to decide whether she should. "She laughed first," he said, "at something I said, and I thought, I have never wanted so badly to be funny again." Clara looked at him, and for the first time since she had arrived at the Kwon estate, through 8 months of invisibility and 6 weeks of preparation and 4 hours of procedure, and all the impossible, complicated, necessary mornings in between, she smiled. Not the composed, professional, yet strategic smile, the real one. It did not stay room 7 for very long after that. Ji-woo renamed it himself, in the direct way of children who have identified an injustice and corrected it. "It's not room 7, he told Park Sung-ho one morning with great authority from his wheelchair in the garden. He was still using the wheelchair some mornings, less and less. "It's my room. Call it my room." Park Sung-ho, who had served Kwon Tae-jin for 14 years, and who was not, in any professional sense, a man of sentiment, said, "Yes, sir." And then he went back inside and told 3 members of the staff and stood in the corridor for a moment by himself with an expression that was strictly no one's business. Clara did not stay at the estate as a maid. That conversation happened in late November, mounted after the second week of Ji-woo's post-procedure monitoring, when Kwon Tae-jin came to find her in the linen room, the same linen room where she had stood in the dark 8 months ago, pressing her back against the wall. and he said, without preamble, "I would like to offer you a different arrangement." "I'm listening," she said. "Jiwoo needs—" He stopped, chose again. "Jiwoo would like you to be present as family, as his sister, not as staff." He paused. "I would like that as well. I believe it would be the right thing." "You believe," Clara said. "I know," he corrected himself. "It is the right thing." She looked at him. "I'll need my own space," she said. "I won't be a resident of the staff quarters." "Of course. I'll continue my education. I have qualifications I haven't finished. I won't stop that. I wouldn't ask you to. And I make my own decisions," she said, "about everything. I am not—" She looked at him steadily. "I know what your life is. I know what this organization is. I am not part of that. Jiwoo is not part of that. That is not negotiable." Kwon Tae-jin held her gaze. "No," he said. "It is not." She considered him. "All right," she said. "All right?" "All right," she said again. "I'll stay. As family." He exhaled. It was the smallest sound she had ever heard from him, barely audible, just the release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said. "Wait until Jiwoo teaches you the 3 Igbo words he now insists everyone in this house learn. He is very serious about it." Something crossed Kwon Tae-jin's face. It was, she realized, a smile. Not the controlled, impressive, carefully measured expression she had seen him deploy in the professional sense. Not the performed warmth of a man managing a room. A real one, small, unpracticed, like something that had been away for a while and was learning, slowly, and with some difficulty, how to come back. And in room 7, his room, a boy who had been singing to himself in the dark for 2 years opened his window, let the left side light in the way he preferred it, and added a new melody to the collection. It had no words yet, but it was, for the first time, not quiet. The most dangerous kind of power is the kind that arrives quietly, wrapped in something ordinary, something forgettable, in something that the eyes of dangerous men slide right over without stopping. If this story moved you, if it made you stop, feel, and believe, then share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.